Imagine planning your dream vacation, only to discover that your destination is off-limits. Not because of personal reasons, but because your passport says United States of America. In 2025, there are 21 countries where the U.S. government advises its citizens do not travel. These advisories stem from escalating conflicts, political unrest, and safety concerns. But here's the twist. Some of these nations have implemented their own restrictions, effectively barring American travelers. Others have become so perilous that even seasoned adventurers think twice. This isn't just about red tape, it's about real risks and evolving geopolitics. Guess which country tops this list? Is it a war-torn nation? Or perhaps a place with stringent political regimes? Comment below with your guess. We'll unveil the answer as we journey through these 20 countries. Before we continue, just a reminder. Everything you're hearing in this video isn't just opinion or assumption. These are real events, backed by verified news sources, government data, and official statements. If you want to read them yourself, I've included the links in the description and pinned comment below this video. Country 1. Mali. Mali faces threats from extremist groups, particularly in the northern and central regions. The U.S. government warns of terrorism, kidnapping, and armed conflict. The presence of international peacekeeping forces has not quelled the violence. In 2025, attacks on civilians and foreign nationals continue. Travelers risk being caught in ambushes or targeted for abduction. The government's limited reach in certain areas exacerbates the danger. Country 2. Belarus. Belarus, often dubbed Europe's last dictatorship, has tightened its grip on civil liberties. The U.S. government warns against travel due to arbitrary detentions and the regime's hostility towards Western nations. Americans have reported increased surveillance and unwarranted interrogations. The political climate is tense, with mass protests being met with force. Foreigners, especially those from the U.S., are viewed with suspicion. The lack of diplomatic transparency and the potential for being used as political pawns make Belarus a high-risk destination. Country 3. Myanmar, Burma. Myanmar's military coup in 2021 plunged the country into chaos. The U.S. State Department's Level 4 advisory cites risks of civil unrest, arbitrary detentions, and armed conflict. Protests are met with violence, and the political situation remains unstable. In 2025, the junta's control is contested, leading to frequent clashes. Foreigners risk being detained without cause, and access to consular services is limited. The unpredictable security environment makes travel hazardous. Country 4. Russia. Russia's geopolitical tensions with the U.S. have escalated. The U.S. State Department warns of arbitrary enforcement of local laws, harassment, and the potential for wrongful detentions. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine adds to the instability. In 2025, Americans face increased scrutiny. Travelers have reported invasive searches and interrogations. The strained diplomatic relations mean that consular assistance may be limited. Country 5. Ukraine. Ukraine remains embroiled in conflict due to Russia's invasion in 2022. The U.S. State Department's Level 4 advisory, updated on November 14, 2024, advises against travel due to armed conflict, crime, and civil unrest. The war has led to widespread destruction and displacement. While some regions may be less affected, the situation is fluid, and the risk of missile strikes and military operations persists. The U.S. government's ability to provide assistance is limited, making travel to Ukraine highly unsafe for American citizens. Country 6. Afghanistan. Once a hub for travelers seeking the crossroads of Central and South Asia, Afghanistan has transformed into a landscape fraught with danger. The U.S. State Department has designated it as Level 4, "Do not travel," citing risks of terrorism, kidnapping, and armed conflict. The Taliban's resurgence has led to unpredictable governance, making it perilous for foreigners, especially Americans. In 2025, the situation remains volatile. Humanitarian organizations have limited access, and the absence of a stable government means that consular assistance is virtually non-existent. Travelers risk being caught in crossfires or detained without cause. The allure of Afghanistan's rugged beauty is overshadowed by the stark reality of its current state. Country 7. Haiti. Haiti, once a beacon of Caribbean culture, now faces political turmoil and rampant crime. The U.S. State Department's Level 4 advisory cites kidnapping crime and civil unrest. Gangs control significant portions of Port-au-Prince, making travel hazardous. In 2025, the situation has worsened. Foreign nationals are prime targets for kidnappings, often held for ransom. The lack of effective law enforcement and judicial systems leaves victims with little recourse. Country 8. Iraq. Iraq continues to face threats from terrorist groups, including ISIS remnants. The U.S. State Department's Level 4 advisory highlights risks of terrorism, kidnapping, and armed conflict. While some regions have stabilized, others remain volatile. In 2025, the security situation is unpredictable. Americans are advised to avoid all travel, as attacks can occur without warning. The Iraqi government's limited control over certain areas exacerbates the danger. Country 9. Lebanon. Lebanon's political instability and economic crisis have led to widespread unrest. The U.S. government warns of crime, terrorism, and armed clashes. Hezbollah's influence and tensions with neighboring countries add to the volatility. In 2025, protests are frequent, and the potential for violence is high. Americans have limited access to consular services, and the risk of being caught in civil disturbances is significant. Country 10. Libya. Libya remains divided among rival factions with ongoing armed conflicts. The U.S. State Department's Level 4 advisory cites risks of crime, terrorism, and civil unrest. The absence of a unified government hampers stability. In 2025, the security situation is dire. Foreigners are at risk of kidnapping and violence. The lack of functional airports and infrastructure further complicates evacuation efforts. Country 11. Iran. Iran's complex relationship with the U.S. has led to heightened tensions. The U.S. government warns of arbitrary arrests and detentions of American citizens. Dual nationals are particularly at risk, often used as leverage in diplomatic disputes. In 2025, the political climate remains fraught. Americans have been detained on vague charges, with limited access to legal representation. The absence of diplomatic relations further complicates assistance efforts. Country 12. North Korea. North Korea is one of the few countries where U.S. passports are not valid for travel without special permission. The U.S. government warns of the serious risk of arrest and long-term detention. Diplomatic relations are virtually non-existent. In 2025, the regime remains opaque and unpredictable. Americans who have entered without authorization have faced harsh penalties. The lack of consular support and the regime's hostility make North Korea exceptionally dangerous for U.S. citizens. Country 13. Sudan. Sudan continues to face significant challenges, including political instability and armed conflict. The U.S. State Department's Level 4 advisory, updated on April 22, 2023, warns against travel due to crime, terrorism, civil unrest, kidnapping, and armed conflict. Despite efforts to transition to a civilian-led government, Sudan has experienced coups and ongoing violence. The security situation remains unpredictable, with frequent protests and clashes. The U.S. government's ability to provide assistance is limited, making travel to Sudan highly dangerous for American citizens. Country 14. Syria. Syria's protracted civil war has created a complex and hazardous environment. The U.S. State Department's Level 4 advisory, issued on March 3, 2025, highlights risks including terrorism, civil unrest, kidnapping, armed conflict, and unjust detention. The U.S. Embassy in Damascus suspended operations in 2012, and the Czech Republic serves as the protecting power for U.S. interests. Americans in Syria face significant risks without access to consular services. The ongoing conflict and presence of various armed groups make Syria extremely dangerous for travelers. Country 15. Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, is rich in natural resources but plagued by conflict. The eastern regions, in particular, are hotspots for armed clashes and rebel activity. The U.S. government warns of crime, civil unrest, and health risks like Ebola. In 2025, the security landscape remains unstable. Foreigners, especially Westerners, are at risk of targeted attacks and kidnappings. The vastness of the DRC and limited infrastructure further complicate emergency responses. Country 16. Central African Republic. The Central African Republic, CAR, remains embroiled in civil unrest. Armed groups control vast territories, and the central government's authority is tenuous at best. The U.S. advises against all travel, highlighting risks of violent crime and kidnapping. Humanitarian efforts are hindered by the volatile environment. For Americans, the absence of a functioning embassy and the potential for being caught in rebel crossfires make CAR an inadvisable destination. Country 17. Burkina Faso. Once known for its vibrant culture and music, Burkina Faso now grapples with escalating terrorist threats. The U.S. State Department's Level 4 advisory cites risks of terrorism, crime, and kidnapping. Jihadist groups have expanded their reach, making even urban areas unsafe. In 2025, the security situation has deteriorated further. Foreign nationals are prime targets for kidnappings, often used for ransom or political leverage. The government's limited control over certain regions exacerbates the danger, leaving travelers vulnerable. Country 18. Somalia. Somalia remains one of the most perilous destinations for travelers, particularly Americans. The U.S. State Department's Level 4 advisory, updated on May 14, 2025, warns against travel due to crime, terrorism, civil unrest, and kidnapping. The government's limited control over certain regions exacerbates the risks, making it challenging to ensure safety for foreign nationals. In 2025, the security situation has deteriorated further. Al-Shabaab, an al-Qaeda-affiliated group, continues to carry out attacks, and piracy remains a threat along the coast. The lack of a stable government and ongoing conflicts among various factions contribute to the country's instability, rendering it extremely dangerous for travelers. Country 19. South Sudan. South Sudan, the world's youngest nation, is grappling with ongoing conflict and humanitarian crises. The U.S. State Department's Level 4 advisory, issued on March 8, 2025, cites crime, kidnapping, and armed conflict as primary concerns. The fragile peace agreement signed in 2018 is under strain, with clashes between government forces and opposition groups. The U.S. has ordered the departure of non-emergency government personnel due to escalating violence. The volatile security environment and limited infrastructure make it exceedingly risky for Americans to travel to or reside in South Sudan. Country 20. Venezuela. Venezuela's ongoing political and economic crises have led to severe instability. The U.S. State Department's Level 4 advisory, reissued on May 12, 2025, warns against travel due to wrongful detentions, crime, civil unrest, poor health infrastructure, and arbitrary enforcement of local laws. The advisory notably recommends that travelers prepare a will and designate beneficiaries before visiting. The U.S. Embassy in Caracas suspended operations in 2019, and consular services are unavailable. The deteriorating conditions make Venezuela an extremely risky destination for Americans. The world is vast, but not every destination is welcoming or safe. These 20-plus countries remind us that a U.S. passport doesn't guarantee access, especially in an era of shifting alliances and rising global tensions. Whether it's war, political retaliation, or a breakdown in diplomacy, these places have drawn a hard line. If this video opened your eyes, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Discovering the World, where we uncover the hidden truths behind global travel, migration, and geopolitics. Which country on this list shocked you the most? Was it a war zone or a popular destination you never expected? Comment below. Let's talk. And remember, in travel, knowledge isn't just power, it's protection.